Thank you, for big audience. Well, for in these times, we're unfortunately limited. For those who don't know, my name is Steffi. I'm born in the Netherlands, based in Berlin since 15 years approximately. Now spending most of my times in the Portuguese countryside, setting up my studio there currently. So this is a tiny little part that was already in bubble wrap, but then Paloma Bar came to me with the request if I wanted to set something up and show all of you how I occupy my time with making beats. So that was my choice today. There's no impressive cable plugging going on, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of insight how I like to make my beat and come to a quick, fun result. Having said that, I have a massive fascination for drum synthesizers, especially when they're from late 70s, early 80s. There's a couple of well-known drum synthesizers like the Simmons range, and there's a beautiful Pearl Syncussion, of course, very famous one. Two voices that I brought here. Then there's a Japanese a drum synthesizer, old sound, with four voices. This is the Division Department. It's a new drum synthesizer and has also four voices. It's analog with two sounds that are actually digital, like a hi-hat and a noise. Um, there's many ways to make music. I want to clearly state that anything you want to do can be done with any type of setup. So it's not like I'm not interested in debating about like this is better than making your sounds in a computer or whatever. I like to be a part of all the worlds and get the best out of those. But what I do like is it for me it's very hands-on to be able to create quick drum sounds by twisting the knobs and being able to create my own sounds next to, for example, the classic range that we know. Of course, the Roland range, and is a very known series of drum computers, like a family. If you think about the 808 and a 909, 606, 707, 727, 626, all these drums, of course, like everybody loves them, and there's a reason why everybody loves them, because they sound amazing to start with. But at some point, it started to limitate myself, and I felt I needed to get things more organic. So I started to work with effect boxes to manipulate the sounds a little bit more and step out of the typical character of an 808. Beautiful drum computer, don't get me wrong. But I wanted to kind of see, okay, what can I do to make my own sounds and develop my music in a way that it starts to sound like me, rather than making a beautiful, say for example, Detroit techno track with a 909, which we all love. But yeah, it has a limitation to the sound palette. So a while ago I started to work with a hardware sequencer, and the beauty of this hardware sequencer is that it has a box attached to it, and it's a trigger box, so it has basically the option of translating the signal to the sequencer, so I can actually play the sounds of these old drum synthesizers with my sequencer. These things used to be in a setup where a drummer would actually play those on a pad. That was a possibility, and I think the original design for those actually were for a drummer to play them on the pads. And I think most of you all know Kraftwerk. It's a very typical kind of sound, and you probably know the videos where he plays it on this like little metallic kind of pad. And basically what the drum computer gets a trigger, and the signal, the pad allows the through the signal, the pad, the drummer gets a chance to play whatever is on the drum synthesizer, excuse me. So basically, before I get lost in technology, beautiful hardware sequencer, and my trigger box. So at some point I was able to integrate all these drum synthesizers into my hardware sequencer. And that's where the fun for me started to happen, because this machine also, I will just gonna go to an example. Like what I've done is, for example, the syncussion and the alt, I put them on a drum channel. And in this sequencer, the beauty of choosing a pattern is, if I would go into there, take a drum pattern and look at this. I don't know if anybody recognizes this, but this is like a kind of a 707, Roland 707 setup, that if I would, for example, start making a song, because that's why we're here for. Let's go crazy with a tempo. 240, because everybody likes it fast these days. And if I would press play, it would sync my TR-8S, which is actually a version of many Roland drum computers into a box. It's all, the sounds are all integrated. It's a digital drum computer that came on the market a while ago, and they have the 909 sounds in there, the 808, basically the whole range. And it gives you the opportunity to put some extra samples in it. So if you want to play your own drums on there, it's possible. The reason why I brought this is also, for me, it's very hands-on. If you want to, for example, play live, for me it's a very, very well-known environment to program everything on a step sequencer, rather than, for example, sitting in the computer and having to draw the rhythm. I prefer to do this, and didn't want to bring all these guys in, so I just brought this because it's a nice kind of hybrid drum computer where you can have a quick result. So I will go into making a beat, unless somebody wants to ask anything before I kick off. Or shall I just kick off? That's the question. Kick off, okay, good. Well, basically, I've as you saw here in the song, I've just set the tempo to 140. Have the drum, I've called it drums, and there's a CK pattern. That's just an, the name for the drum grid. As I said, very similar to a 707. So the first four, if you can see me scrolling down, the first four, just to get you in a little bit of a, just to give you a little bit of a feeling. Look. So what I can do is actually just program them all on here. So this is basically now my mothership to be able to give this guy the opportunity to play, rather than having to drum it, which would be incredible, but there's a whole different world. The thing with this type of drum synthesizer, is that a lot of the oscillators already have a particular kind of signal flow. You of course you have, for example, loads of similar kind of drum computers, a drum synthesizer racks in Euro rack modular system, where you have a bigger field of possibilities. What I like about this is that it's very hands-on, and it's also, yeah, it has the 70s kind of character, what I really like. Um, the good thing, if this is a white noise setting, then you just get like a typical snare, noise, cymbal, hi-hat type of thing. But as soon as you would switch to the oscillator being more free, and that's where the madness can actually start, and you have an option to do attack, arrange that, and then there's an LFO, and this is the level, the frequency, the low or high, and there's a sweep. Like, that's basically how wide, I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but how wide the LFO goes within the sound. So basically, this is like a tiny little explanation. Of course, there's tuning. You can flip it up a whole octave, which I like because I can just instantly see how it works. If it's too low and I just want to use it in a different an octave, I can just like switch it up and check what's happening. Now, to be very fair, I am not a person that is really nerdy about specifications of what does what, and can tell you like endless stories about, okay, if you would do this, that would happen, or this is how the sound gets generated. Like, I know the basics of what I need to know about the instrument, and I didn't want to do a tech talk of like, this is what this is what this instrument could do, because then I think 90 minutes would be far gone. But what I would like to show is how fun it is if we have all these different drum synths available to be able to build up a rhythm. So we're talking about 4 sounds here, 4 sounds here, 2 sounds here, and then of course what comes out of the TR-8S. So I'm gonna arrange this and just go to a bass kick. And take a little bit of effect off, because that's what we brought as well to make it more fun. And for example, if we would just go with this guy. Just to show you quickly, and then I would like to go into a little bit of a jam. This is what, if you would take the white noise circuit, you can, it's pretty limited to what you can do, but it's, I mean, still a beautiful hi-hat. But where it gets interesting for me, if I choose to get more bleepy, and the interesting thing for me is to layer loads of stuff. Type of hi-hat. It's fun, but bass line type of sound, which I find. Just to give you an idea of, again, like a couple of settings internally already decided what type of sound you get. And it's beautiful to make a bass line with. Really easy hands-on for me. What I like about this is that I can just like try to see, okay, where does that sit for me in a rhythm? Like what tonal kind of structure or like identification does this sound need to have? Just to start twisting. What I also find very important for me to make drum sounds is to be able to get it organic. So I just brought a effect rack so that we can add a little bit of flavor and a little bit more dynamic to it. So. Signal. This thing is velocity sensitive because this is a very new kind of drum synthesizer, so I can decide basically how hard the hit is, which I find very just make it a little bit more interesting. We can still use something from the original. And for me, this is like a nice quick way to get into a mood, you know, and you can just get lost basically in this jam by
for the jam. So there's one question.
Mm-hmm.
So say you now found the 16 step sequences that you like for the drumming. What would be the next step kind of to take this into an arrangement or record it? Like, do you record
Yeah,
like
that's a
just
good
6
question.
minutes or 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
or yeah.
Well, basically, what you can do is I also want to highlight that this is a 16 step um, pattern now, but you can just like see, you can just up it to this wide grid and then start programming like little shuffles in between. So that is if you want to get more in depth of your drum pattern. And of course, if you would do 6 of these or 4, you know, you can basically, as you can see here, this is what I've just programmed. And now if I would say copy and I want to get the whole set up to a next pattern, I can just like insert it here, and you could just have 2 patterns and start like programming your second pattern, or just make variations. So you quickly copy one pattern to the next pattern and just like, you know, just bringing in your variations or leaving things out, or you know, no, that's what starts to make the arrangement more interesting. What I normally do is I would do, well, say like a 4 pattern loop that is interesting to me, and make the variations, and then multi-track that into every single sound into the computer, or leave stuff grouped when I'm using, for example, a fun effect machine like this, so that I don't lose a lot of the natural flow of the jam sessions. I would try to gain stage it properly on the mixer. I use an outboard mixer in my studio, so that I have of what, this was just a silly jam that I did before, but like what if I would like to capture it, I could actually just like lay out. This is now a two see 6 patterns, like up to whatever I want to do and what I need for the song to develop. I have to be honest, I've never arranged the whole song in here, but I know that people who do it, which is really, really interesting, because there's many variations of like also deciding that every pattern has a different length, so you can just go like crazy and do like polyrhythmic stuff. Somebody asked me that the other day. I'm not a polyrhythmic person, but you know, that's also possible. So, but what I, coming back to the question, what I normally do is like I make like 4 or 6 or 8 bars that are interesting to me, and record this and let it run for a while. And sometimes on the fly, take things out if I don't like it, or just add stuff. But that the basics are basically programmed on the step sequencer, and then later on in the computer I can do post-production by adding effects on certain layers that I didn't really like in the end. Because what I normally do is I record it and then pack it away for a while, and then come back to it. So I could save this, but if I would not be interested in having it in my sequencer save, because I would have to actually take a picture of the settings, because these old drum synthesizers don't have a memory, so that you wouldn't be able to store anything unless you make a picture. But most of the time that's not really relevant for me. Like once I've got it and I'm happy with it, I'm just gonna record it and leave it in the computer. And that's also fun, because you can, for example, recycle what you've recorded by creating your own sound bank and sampling these sounds back into a software sampler, for example. And if you want to work on the road, or you have a fantastic snare drum, or something great happened with the effect machine that like gave you a crazy result, and you want to reuse that, like you can just like chop it up and then throwing it back into the sampler. So bit by bit, I'm just creating my own kind of drum sound world with what I literally take out of a recording.
Cool. And do you tend to, like, when you record it, say 5 or 6 minutes, do you tend to leave most of it as it is, or do you do like a lot of chopping still afterwards once you recorded it?
That really depends on on how I look back at it. Like if I would open the song, open the recording, and I would just try to, as I said before, try to capture every single sound as much as possible. I would just see how it feels, and sometimes the moment was fantastic, and then I'm coming back into the arrangement. I'm like, maybe the tonality wasn't right. Sometimes you see with, for example, the syncussion. I use these, believe it or not, but I use it a lot for bass lines as well, and it can be a little bit off. Because it's a tune, it's like a manual tuning here with two oscillators that sometimes it sounds amazing, but you're coming back to your design and you're like, I don't know. So I would either just throw it in a sampler and play it again, or just adjust it. And that what I like about this world and the world in the computer is that if I've actually recorded it into the computer, I can do loads of post production with interesting plugins to emphasize certain sounds that I think have to be more dominant in the mix, or they have to play a bigger role, or eventually change hi-hats if I don't like them. It kind of depends on the mood, and how satisfied I am with what I've done. I always try to do a quick jam and see if it sits with me, add some bass line maybe from another synthesizer, and then some polyphonic sounds and a melody and all that kind of stuff, and then say, okay, does this work for me? And I let it cycle for a while, and then I can actually do some fine tuning with all the instruments, and in the end of the day, okay, this is what really works for me. I probably don't work on it more than 1.5 hours, just to keep your ears very fresh. And if it still sits right, like if I would let it run for 8 hours, it would probably go like, ugh, and completely kill me. So do a fast recording of what I have. And those are just little projects that I put aside. And sometimes I'll just grab a hi-hat or a snare drum from a previous jam that I've done, depending on, the outcome, if that makes sense. Yeah,
Do you want to go for another question?
could do.
There was one question from Dana on Facebook, and she was asking about the pink and green machine, the effect.
Yeah, the hypnose. That's like three. Yeah, how do you say it? Like the three different. No, that's actually not true. There are four. It's a chorus flanger, delay, and spring reverb in one box. And what I like about this, and especially the chorus flanger thing, it it um, it gives me a lot of possibilities to make something start to move like really organically, rather than having just a very kind of like stiff hi-hat. That's like something that, well, if I say bother, it sounds a bit negative, but it is something that I would like to add to the palette of a hi-hat being able to move, and it's very quick and hands-on. So basically we have chorus flanger here, a delay option here, and a spring reverb, which is, for example, beautiful on a snare drum. And these are the buttons that activates which effect is playing. You can have all of them play at the same time, of course, the bypass button. And the reason why I fell in love with this one, not only the design, this shouldn't be a product talk, but um, I I was actually stuck in Portugal during the early weeks of the lockdown, and just tried to experiment with um, like a basic drum computer, and just putting the drum computer through the effects, and just start to look for like melodic type of drum sequences by just like using the flanger and chorus on the full sum, or separate the bass kick, because that's a bit of a sensitive topic when it comes to an insert effect, and just like see what like see what it does to a whole group of drums. And yeah, ever since I'm kind of keeping this one close to me to yeah, to get some groovy stuff going. Because if you would just see the loop that I've done, and then that's a dry one, and it makes a hell of a difference. And it can actually, to me, actually, and for some people, these little changes is something that they either have to reproduce in the computer, which is completely fine. Don't get me wrong. There's loads of beautiful plugins for this, and I also use them. But I just like to be able to, you know, what I hear in the moment by quickly twisting and seeing what that does to my groove. That is something that I find very important for my creative flow. So this is just like a 3 effect little box, very affordable and very fun, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it might be great even to listen to like the hi-hat pattern and see you list just
Yeah,
the
we
hi-hats and
yeah
see
we
how
could
you use
yeah
the
we could
effect.
definitely do that. That's a good idea actually. So why don't we mute these guys? And this is like a very like strong. So for example, I'm just using chorus and flange here. There's a little bit of reverb. I mean, you can go crazy with that, but like on a hi-hat, it's not something I would massively want to boost with a reverb. But just the difference between playing with the depth of the LFO and the rate. The rate is on full now, just going back. These are subtle changes. Just open the rate, make it. Sorry. See, for me, this is already like a melody, believe it or not. And if I just mute that, so we came from this dry signal to, and there could be something that you're kind of looking for in a song where it just does something by itself and still having the function of a hi-hat. Sometimes it can be pretty muddy if you're overdoing it and you're just going crazy with it. But it brings life to the song. And you have to be a little bit aware of frequency clashes. I tend to kind of like all throw it in the pot and go like, oh, this is amazing, and then finding out that loads of things kind of start to clash with each other. In some types of music that's very popular if it sounds dirty and raw, but you know, you also have to make it a bit pleasant for the listener. So, and actually, like what I wanted to explain, so I'm not doing any magic here that hasn't been done before, but what I would like to say is that, like, if I compare to how I would make music 10 years ago, which a lot of it, like, I started collecting hardware pieces 20 years ago, and I really want to state, like, for me, it doesn't matter whether I work in a computer or if I work with hardware. There is no debate about if something should be analog or digital. I think the fact that we have so much access to so many different kinds of production, that is actually enlarging and widening the horizon. But I found my early music very static and always had dreams about like classic albums, you know, like how were they made, and my God, how can that be so dynamic, and what am I missing? And then I finally started to dive into my workflow, and actually one of the things that immediately, you know, popped up is the fact that most of these unexpected kind of sounds, you know, like going into places is a matter of like choosing the right effects and playing with this, and also it's also like you know, finding the sweet spot, and that's where I started to implement these little machines also for the fun of it, you know, like music should be fun, and there's many rules to it. But at the same time, there are absolutely no rules, and this works for me. Like I can just quickly make a beat and see if that sits, and then if I have the basics of my beat, lay the melody on top, and yeah, it's a preference. You know, I really want to repeat that again because there's so many debates about whether you should go buy a modular system or throw this all overboard, not throw it away, but throw it overboard and go back and make music in a computer, because it can be just as good. So it has nothing to do with the outcome. I think it's just like you should have fun as a producer, and whatever you want to use to be able to come up with a great result, that is up to you. Now, well, I fell in love with drum synthesizers and crazy effects boxes, so started to work with that, and actually found my way closer to the result that I wanted to have as a producer, you know, compared to what I've done in the past. And I'm not saying, I'm very proud of what I've done, so it's not a matter of saying something wasn't there, but it's good to see that you can develop and explore also how things have been made, and how you can create different different worlds with like just freaking around. But the question was about this, and I completely completely took it into a different direction.
I think the question for the effect was answered too.
Yeah.
So all good.
Really good fun. Really good fun.
There was a question from David. He was asking about the division department drum synthesizer. If you could just give like a quick, just tell us something about it.
Well, it's a fairly new machine. As I said, it has the two analog options here, and then a white noise and a hi-hat that are two digital, let's just call it circuits, that are already laid out. So and it actually also has an FM, which is a type of synthesis which I haven't really played with yet, but I know it has that. So basically you could use 4 analog voices, you know, using this switch, and then you could just try create a type of hi-hat with white noise that is actually digital with these 2 switches. They can also communicate with each other, which I don't use that much, but it's fun to have a look at once you've got one of those. The good thing about this one, it's MIDI, so I've just, as I can just quickly show that onto the sequencer. I've just I'm using the same CK pattern, but like it's excuse me, it's connected via MIDI into the sequencer, which is a little bit more stable for me, and most of the time the MIDI stuff is velocity sensitive, so it's great if we would just, for example, if we just erase this quickly. See, that's what I like about the layout, you know, it's just like tick tick tick. I don't have to sit with the mouse and draw. I'm just gotta just get this. Is everybody out? Okay, so if I would, this is the digital circuit. Just gonna put it on full volume. This is out. And you can just say the tone. I would translate it to pitch if you like. And don't get me wrong, this can just be easily be done in a software program as well. But I just like the fact that I can just like listen, twist. That's important for me, you know. Shorten my decay. See, but then if I would just this would be a quick way to design a nice hi-hat. See, what I'm doing now is giving it the same type of velocity. You can do that with a quicker way, but I just wanted to show you, like, this indicates the velocity, which is this, the intensity of the hit of the hi-hat. Very boring to me, unless you would use that one and put the effect on it. But you can kind of humanize it by just like saying, like, okay, I want only these two to play a little bit of an accent. And it starts to come to life a little bit more. So that would be the hi-hat function. This is noise, white noise. Also digital. Filter. Very hands-on. And I think the way I make music is I'm a fan of getting a fast result. There's no challenge for me in coming up with something unexplored that nobody has ever done. So what I like about the options here, and I'm going to come back to the question, is that I can just quickly get what's in my head and what I would like to add to the song by just twisting the knobs and also putting it in the mix already. That's an important thing for me. So basically, these are the two digital circuits. You could say pre-programmed by the way it's been laid out, and then there's two shapes, whole different vibe. Tuning. There's a sweep for the LFO, and you can decide the range, so how fast, slow. Quite cool. So the sweep, you can make a white sweep with the LFO, and of course then now this is interesting for me because this is a hi-hat, or kind of a hi-hat, and if you're just switching it back, this has a whole different function in a tune, so you can just come to very fast, beautiful results without having to patch a lot, which I prefer. But then again, I also admire the people who make beautiful patches and create their own sonic palette. And there's another shape. You can instantly see that, like, the saw is a different type of I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit. But I think what I would like to highlight with this is also that there are so many new brands on the market that actually make this type of stuff available and affordable. Like this to me looks very much like a Pearl Drum X, which is like a 80s rack drum synthesizer where you have to, push the button to be able to, increase or decrease the decay or the filter or the pitch, and it takes a long time to get a result. It's a beautiful sounding drum synthesizer, and what I like about this, it has a similar kind of character, but they've just made it into a small tiny box. I would just love to see this going with me on the road once I'm ready to go back into playing live, and to be able to just do sing just single jams with only like these four sounds, because there's so many options that you can actually use. Lost again.
There was another question as
Yeah.
well. Um, do you usually gravitate towards the drum synthesizers when you go into the studio, like to start the production? Is that usually your starting point, or
Drums?
yeah,
Yeah.
drums? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, drums and bass. Yeah, totally. That's why like when I got asked to do a tech talk, I mean, I can start talking about what an LFO is, and probably there are a million more people on this planet that can do that better than me. But what I would like to, put on display today is like this is what I would grab to make a basic beat. This would be something that I would fall back on. Maybe exchange the TR-8S for maybe a different type of drum computer where I would just take a kick from, or a couple of little sounds depending on the mood, like. But this is definitely for me, with a couple of others that I left at home, this is my world basically. So start and stop, and think about a tempo, or even halfway through when I'm jamming, thinking like, oh, what could happen if I slow it all the way down. But it's always the drum computers and the drum synthesizers that are my kickoff to make a track. Yeah, and these two are the most important ones. And the fun thing is that it just you can tweak around, and the field is so wide, and in combination with an effect machine, that's why I brought that also, is that it make it you can make it unrecognizable. And that's what I said in the beginning. And with a for example, a very famous Roland drum machine, it you start to recognize the sounds, and this is important for me to create my palette. So yeah, the basic setup.
And for the drum synthesizers, do you have like an approach for EQing them? Because like they all
Yeah.
sound like very bleepy,
Find
and
somebody
so
who's really good at it.
it sounds like there might be like a lot of frequencies that
Absolutely. I mean, there's loads of clashes, and um, sometimes that's pretty challenging to deal with, because they're all from a different brand, and sometimes it's hard to get them in the mix properly, and one sound could be completely peaking, and I have to compress that, and another sound is like a slow pulsing gentle kind of sound. That's a big challenge for me, that I'm still exploring, like how can I make these come to life in the mix, and not having too many frequency clashes. And sometimes it's also, I mean, as you could see, like you can just program so many sounds, so sometimes it gets completely over the top, and then you have to get rid of a couple of sounds. And the 6 snare drums is not exactly a necessity to get the groove going. But yeah, that is something that in post production needs to be looked at. I try to do it as much on the desk as possible. I have a bigger desk in my studio, but like always have to go back and review what I've done, to be able to make sure that it actually sounds good. And I've heard people saying in earlier tech talks, like, you should always be able to mix down your own music. True, very true. But on the other hand, I also started to notice that mixing down is also a completely different field, with a whole bunch of people that are actually purely specified on mixing down a track. And sometimes it's really interesting to bring your difficulties onto a desk with somebody else, and having these people play with it. But yeah, I find that still very challenging.
does it take like, if you could, is there, if there's like how much does the mixing take in comparison to like the jamming and arrangement?
Oh,
Is like
for me, like also energy wise, the mixing for me is the most difficult part of creating the song. It's just it's it's a thing that for me, I bump into the most amount of difficulties. The jamming for me, I do so many, like most of the time 3 a day, because I make them very short and then they keep themselves fresh, pack them away and come back. So I sketch a lot and not necessarily everything gets to be released or used. If I would make a 12-inch, like maybe from 4 tracks, it would be it would be a family of 12 tracks, and only 4 would end up on the 12-inch. So the creative process, excuse me, is very fast for me, but the mixing down, there's so much to learn and so much to discover, getting the best results. And yeah, I'm a bit critical, and yeah, it's never enough for me. And I'm not there where I want to be, but like, where does that end? I don't think anybody's ever happy. Um, well, happy, yes, but like, there's so much to explore, and you can always upgrade it. So for me, the most back to your question, the most time goes into mixing down a track, and that's where I find the most challenge. Because this is just fun, and that's what it should be. I think a jam session shouldn't be difficult, because then, yeah, then I don't know if you're making music for the right reasons if a jam session is difficult, or either you don't have you haven't got the right workflow, or it's just forced for whatever reason.
Then there's a question from David, and he's asking, when you jam and record, um, he's asking if you record pre-FX or if you record the effects and the signal in one.
Okay, that completely depends on how happy I am with the result. Like the mixer I use has a great section of subgroups, which I don't think if you could see. This little mixer has 4 subgroups, but I have a 8 mixer with 8 subgroups, and these subgroups also have an option to have an insert effect on the subgroup. So sometimes I would actually, for example, if I have drums and I want to preamp them or give a little bit of character to the drum, I can actually put a type of compressor. For example, a Universal Audio has a beautiful preamp, or a tube kind of preamp, whatever works. I could actually send the drums to there and record that as one signal. Or if I want to use an outboard reverb because it does something special to the music, or I've tweaked it with other effects, I can record a dry signal and separate separate the effects on a different channel. So we'd always have the dry signal and then a separate recording of the effects. Or sometimes I'm happy enough and I would just record it as one through one output. I used to be very careful with this and like, oh, I should be able to touch it afterwards if I'm not happy. Maybe there's too much reverb on it or whatever. But sometimes it just sounds great as it is, and I'm like, I just want to go with this, and whatever happens afterwards, I don't really care. But with the way I've set up my desk, unfortunately, I can't show you now. But like, everything is able to go into the sound card on its own, and the effects have their own channel as well. So yeah.
Just wanted to say, like, all questions so far came from the online audience. So if there's any questions from in here, or like, you're obviously in the cool position now to maybe say if you want to hear another jam from Steffi, or if you have some specific questions, please go ahead. Or like me personally, I would like to hear another jam session. But yeah,
We can
tell
do
us what you want.
We could surely do that. Slow one. I can always speed it up. Where did that come from? Oh yeah, we were still in the hi-hat conversation. Okay. Just gonna erase a couple of things that were in this other crazy sketch. Okay, I'm just gonna go back to one pattern. just set up a slow tempo thing, just so it has you can actually listen to what's going on. Sometimes just like to see what happens, especially when I'm jamming. Just switch back to the different circuits, just to give you a quick see how quick actually the sound type of the song starts to change by just using the oscillator in a different circuit, setup circuit. Now this is where it starts to get wild.
was
that
just
that was
going.
like
I was just going to
5 minutes or
anyways.
something.
Yeah.
So that like within 5 minutes, I've actually switched from low tempo to high tempo just to see um, what kind of set right with me. Because if I start making a song, it doesn't necessarily need to have a certain set tempo, 115 or 140. I'm very open with this, and like sometimes I start slow to be able to hear what I'm laying out on the sequencer, and then I'm jamming up the tempo, and actually that's where it started to sit right for me, and I could just like switch the different sounds and tweak a little, and then finally I hear something that I really like, and then I would start to either record or put the melody in.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's one question at least from in here and a few more from online, and we have like 15 minutes left. So
Jesus,
for
and I was worried
everyone,
about 90 minutes.
yeah, if you have any more questions, write them in the chat, or yeah, put your hand up if you want to ask something now. Yeah.
Hey. Well, as I said to you, not to you, but to everybody before, like when I compare my music to what I do now and how I would approach it, I think what helped me a lot is by listening to music in depth and filter out certain sounds that you want to concentrate on and think like how is it possible that how did this get generated, like, and I would actually, advise myself to, narrow my setup and start tweaking as much as possible, and get a little bit more acquainted with what certain effects would do, and just yeah, get that little world a little bit more opened up, like I think what when I was making music 15 years ago, it was more about the happiness of actually finishing a track, and then if it would be a great track, you would go like, oh yeah, I've actually finished a track. Now I would actually, with this knowledge, go much more in detail and think about like, oh, I want this to pulsate a little bit more or less, or and not, but I guess, it's always difficult to say like what if when but I think the general mistake that I made is that I thought I needed to change gear or mix boards, or to be able to get a result, which is in the end of the day, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's all about making the miles and diving into the world of possibilities and curiosity, and a lot of patience is what I didn't have. I had a lot of curiosity, but I didn't have a lot of patience. So I would just go like, why is this not working? And how come I don't know how to make this sound like this? And that is just a years of experience, and also just your expectation value, lower the expectation value. I was very eager 15 years ago to get it right, but since I've been only teaching myself, I've never been to school. Now you've got beautiful ways of studying synthesis and music production and everything that comes with that. Like for me, it was just a long road of reading manuals or not reading the manuals, or should have read the manuals. So yeah, patience would have been a very welcome thing.
Cool. There's a few more questions from online.
I'm just gonna
Um,
drink a little bit of water if nobody
Someone was
minds.
asking, do you make use of the deeper algorithmic functions on the Circlon, like for example the aux events?
Actually, um, I should, but I'm a lazy person when it comes to optimizing these things in the Circlon. It's also possible to work with all your CC messages, and I have only used it very standard now, but I recently had to get this looked at because the battery was um, running empty, and the Colin who actually designed this sequencer, showed me a couple of things quickly, and I was like, oh, why don't I take the time to do it? And that, kind of relates to the question before, is that patience sometimes is a very um, necessary thing, because actually it's amazing to be able to control everything in the circle, and I'm not taking advantage of these opportunities. So I haven't done it, like just a very thin layer of aux and CC, but I actually should, and I would recommend it for somebody who wants to specify or specialize themselves into making an arrangement or music on this thing, and go into the deeper layer. So I should kick myself in the butt and do it.
Cool. David was asking, what's your current favorite for bass lines, except the drum synths that you already said?
Pooh, mini moog, anything. It doesn't really matter for me. Like, there's so I love Waldo, for example. Pulse One, beautiful. I also like the classic SH 101. Um, Moog Little Fatty, Mini Tower, all very beautiful. In the end of the day, it doesn't really matter like what machine I use. It's more like how it sits in the song. But I do have to say, I'm very I'm a very big fan of Moog, and or Moog, or whatever I should call it. Yeah, but no, actually no, because FM and linear synthesis is also like Roland, like early digital synths like D50 and Yamaha and DX7, DX100, and the little box I have is DX200, also beautiful. Really, it depends on the mood. Like, as I said, for me, there's no rule between analog or digital. Like, every synthesizer I have, I can make great bass lines out of it. So I'm sorry, not really a lousy answer. I'm sorry.
All right, I have one last question. If your studio was to burn down and you could
Oh,
only
ho,
save,
ho, 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 ho.
if it was to, and you could only save one piece of equipment, what would it be?
Oh, that is so mean. Why do people need to answer this? Like, why do you want, like, I don't even want to think about a studio that burns down. But I know that that would be a fun question. I would not be able to give you the answer. I think the old would be one of my things to save, because that's quite hard to get. And I have a beautiful memory MOOC that I would like to take as well, but I can't even lift that out of a building if I had to jump, and the whole place is on fire. So yeah, they're all valued to me, so valuable to me. So, but this is my very special suitcase, and actually I could take it under my arm, so I would be able to rescue it. And the memory MOOC is very heavy, and probably the voices would be out of tune by the time it arrives in a fire-free zone. So yeah,
Cool. I think if there's no more questions, then we'd go for like a 15-20 minute break to for Fadi to set everything up. Yeah, if you
perfect.
have any more questions, now is your time.
Quiet audience. I
Cool.
think we're
All right,
good.
then
No,
thanks a lot, Steffi.
you're very welcome. Thanks for
And give it
having
up.
me. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun with my colleague Fadi, who's gonna bring you into a different environment. Thanks, guys.
Cool. All right. Thanks for waiting. We're ready with the reset up, and yeah, I think there's not much more to say. Let's get started with 90 minutes of Fadi Mohem. Give it up.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Fadi Mohem, and I want to show you my recent live setup and my approach to playing live, and how I constantly change the setup, and how it always keeps me inspired. And yeah, so I started to start with a little bit of myself. I started making music in 2011 or so, and I had my first live gig in 2014 with a friend of mine, and he asked me, "Hey, let's play live together and throw all our machines together, and let's have a great jam in the club with Klaus Schöning." He's also part of the Spandau 20 gang. And we had so much stuff in the club, and it was, we really, this was the first time where I also thought, how how do you how do you manage to get a setup where everything works together in a nice, intuitive way, and lets you kind of create new things on the fly very fast. And this is also what I constantly think about when I'm planning a new live set. And the good thing is that I don't play live as much as I DJ. So usually I play DJ sets. So between the live setups or the live sets, I have quite a lot of time to rearrange everything and to create new patterns and new tracks for the live set. And I can kind of always get a different live set for individual surroundings and clubs. And yeah, so I think it's best maybe to kind of start with a little jam, and then I can go through the whole setup and explain what I did. All right, so let's listen to it first. right. So, what was going on? So my current setup consists of, as you can see, the Octatrack, the Digitone from Electron, a modular system, and a little Faderfox controller that controls everything. And I've got this little analog heat that is on the master and some effects, just two delays, and that's about it. And you can actually play with a lot less, and you can also play live with a laptop or whatever and still make great music. And this is just the setup that I kind of chose over the years. And yeah, maybe I'm gonna explain why and how it works. So I use the Digitone as my master clock, and it's an 8-track, 8-voice digital FM synthesizer, and I'm very much into FM synthesis, and the pad that you just heard came from this machine. So maybe let's listen to it again. And the way I use it is, or what's nice about it is that you have this great Electron type sequencer, or actually all of my little stations have their own sequencer, and that's kind of what I focused on. So the live setup consists of like little groups of equipment that can produce sound on their own. So the modular has its own sequencer, the Octatrack has a sequencer, and the Digitone also has a sequencer. So it's actually 3 separate sections now. And with the Digitone, it has 4 tracks that you can program. So you have 4 synthesizers in one box, basically. But you are limited to 8 voices, so you cannot stack it too much. But I think it's already quite great for this size also. And what bothered me a little bit with this machine was that you can only alter one on one page at once. So for example, when I have this pad going on here, I can just manipulate the filter and can't manipulate the amplifier, for example, at the same time, or can't I cannot alter the sound on the second track. So what I did then was I got this little Faderfox controller to program it or to control it. And the nice thing about this little box is at first its form factor, because it's quite small, and it's a MIDI controller, and it gives you 8 push button encoders, 8 faders, a crossfader, and also 8 buttons that you can use, and you can all program it via MIDI CCs and control different gear with it. So I thought what I want to have is I want to be able to control the filters of each track individually on one page, and I did that by using these faders for this application, basically. So I don't know if you can see it, but you can definitely hear it, that I'm controlling the cutoff with this fader and the resonance with this fader. And I set it up that I can also control the envelope depth of the filter with this button. So now I can have immediate access to shaping the sound and for four synthesizer voices at once. So that's quite nice. And then I figured I had so many more buttons, what to do with them, and I started to find a way how to set it up so that I could also control parts of the octatrack with this, and the master effects on the digitone, and also the effects for two of the tracks. So I basically used every button on here to control what's left. So for example, I'm using these 8 buttons or these 7 buttons to mute my tracks on the octatrack. So when I go back to this pattern I had here, I'm able to mute it on the fly. So that's also quite nice, because on the octatrack you can also mute stuff in here, but this way you can stay on the pattern programming page and mute different stuff on the fly. So everything is controllable and also programmable at the same time, and that's what I'm very focusing on when I choose the instruments for my live setup. So I want to have direct access, but also have the possibility to kind of program it in a way that it's very organic. And with the Electron machines, you are it's quite easy to do that because of the parameter logs. So you can have you can modulate each step quite heavily, and also with the trick conditions you can have a lot of stuff going on for only like a couple of bars or at some percentage. And after I programmed these, why 7? You might ask, because there's 8 tracks on the octatrack, but I will come back later to this. The 8th track is a master track, which you cannot mute anyway, because that's your master, you don't want to mute that. And so I had this 8th button left, and I figured that I have a MIDI to CV converter in here, and I can use the CC out of this IntelliJ MIDI to CV converter to control one thing in the modular, and that's what I did, and I'm gonna come back to it later also. So I can basically control like little bits of the live set. For example, I can also mute the 4 tracks of the digitone in here by pushing these 4 buttons, and I set the live setup so that 2 sounds or one voice of the modular goes into the digitone as well. So the digitone also has inputs which give you the opportunity to use the onboard effects for these inputs. And this is the master section. I don't know if you can see it on the screen or if it's too small, but on the master section you have the chorus, delay and reverb for the analog inputs. And now I'm able to effect my modular sounds, and I quite like the chorus and basically all of these little effects in here. They sound quite nice, and I don't need another box to get effects. So that's quite cool. So when let me show you this little modular sound. I programmed this so that these two buttons over here, these encoders, send or open the delay in the digitone and the reverb in the digitone, so that when I play my modular line here, I can immediately send it into the effects like you would do it on a mixing desk, and it's quite convenient to have like so much controls in this little box. And I will also tell you that my focus really is on kind of making the setup as compact and as flexible as possible. So that's just one point for that actually. So yeah, let's move on maybe. So the digitone is basically my kind of digital pad and chord and also FM bass machine, and I figured I can, like with FM synthesis, you can kind of get everywhere sound-wise, more or less, and so in that respect, it's quite It's a quite powerful machine, and I mean, you could, or I could also imagine to just play live with this machine and another drum machine, for example. So the next important thing for my live setup is obviously the Octatrack, which is an 8-track sampler and sequencer, and I basically use it as a drum machine right now, and I have 8 possible tracks for it, but as I told you, I'm using the 8th track as a master track, so I can effect the master of the Octatrack as well. So for example, here I have this compressor on it and another spatializer, for example, and this also always changes, and it really depends on the kind of music I want to make with this setup. So if I want to do an ambient live set, for example, this would probably look a little bit different. And yeah, so the way that I set it up, because I think that's quite interesting for some people, is that I'm using it in the studio mode. So this way you have 2 separate stereo outputs, the main and the Q. And on this day, I thought let's do it in another way than I did it the other days. So I used the Q out for the kicks, so I have the kicks separate on the mixer, and I'm using the other channels. The other channels are feeding into the master, which can be affected, and that's also a nice way to kind of get a full sound already in this machine, and the kind of recipe for that is also what you feed into it. So I think it's really important when you are using this machine to make your own sounds. Like it's basically the same with every sampler. So when you want to have your own kind of sound or aesthetic, you should try to create your own sounds, just like Steffi demonstrated. use your own type of instruments or your own type of little tricks, or even in the computer, use maybe different plugins than all the other people are using, or find your own kind of way of making samples in the yeah, basically. So that's what I did also here. So I have a folder basically on my computer which is called Live 19 or Live 20, and I have this subsections that are called like bass drum and hi-hat and like all parts of elements. It could even be synthesizers and stabs and effect sounds and so on. And I constantly update this these folders, and this kind of keeps my own sample library fresh, and this eventually keeps my live set fresh, and um, my ideas. So I think it's very important to when you don't want to make music, or when you're having some time in the morning or something, and you only have 1 hour or so. So it's kind of nice to really focus on making sounds that help you to create something later on. So and this, like when you do it this way, you can also you are very fast in creating patterns, especially on this machine, because you have 128 sample slots in here, and when you, I don't know if you can see it, I'm not sure. Yeah, no, the screen is a little bit small. Okay, that's fine. But I think you got the idea. Like when you are having this kind of sample folder with all the sub folders, you can dive into it and just go through all your kicks that you really like in the first place, so you don't have to go through, let's say, 100 kicks in the sample library that you just bought. Even when you are like when you don't make your own samples. I mean, I also collected a couple of samples over the years from different sample packs and stuff, but it's good to kind of keep this your favorite sample folder or something, however you want to call it. Yeah. So when I start with a live set, I usually start with either drums on the Octatrack or synthesizer sequences on the Digitone, and that's like these three things are basically the heart of it. And it could also be another synthesizer, and it could also be another drum machine, but I always kind of want to be able to um, to modulate the sounds directly, and to be able to store patterns so that I can fall back to, and that I can reprogram fast on the fly. And I, like, for my own taste, I think these Electron machines are very far ahead when it comes to this kind of intuitive programming. Yeah, so the other big part of the live setup is the modular, and that's also something I got into quite early. Like I don't know, I got my first synthesizer in 2013, 14 or something, and I immediately kind of saw the opportunities I had with going into modular, and this is like really just something I figured out for myself. And I I mean, generally I wouldn't recommend anything, because you should really figure out what you want to use on your own, basically, because I can just show you what I'm interested in and what helps me to be productive. But in the end, it for somebody, it's like maybe better to just use synthesizers like the Digitone or the computer or anything else. So that's just what I want to remind everybody that because a lot of people are yeah, modular, that's the way to go, so then my music gets better or something. And I've I've seen a lot of synthesizers and I've used a lot of them, and I I think it really doesn't get you anywhere else. So in the end, you really have to be creative on your own and try to make um, the best you can with what you have. So that's just a little side story, maybe. But yeah, for those of you who are interested in modular, this is basically all I have, and I didn't went bigger, and I'm not so much addicted that I really need to kind of have everything that's coming out. I'm really always looking at modules and thinking, um, do I need this, or like how does it work for me and where does it get me? So when I started going into modular, at first I really wanted to have a small setup that's very where you have a lot of modulation options. And so the first thing that I got was this little oscillator from IntelliJ, and I still have it to this day, and I still love it because it's very flexible sound-wise, because it gives you a lot of modulation options. For example, the through zero FM modulation and exponential FM and linear FM and like all kinds of pulse width modulation stuff. And then I kind of built this. When I built this modular, I um, I already tried to kind of get the format as small as possible so that I am able to play live in a club with it, because I like what I told you, like when we first started playing live back then with Klaus, we brought so much stuff into the club, and it was just way too much, and it was very fun, and but I kind of figured that I really want to focus on like some machines that don't overwhelm me in a way. And the modular here is it's quite simple actually, because it's right now it's one analog voice that consists of two oscillators, and I'm able to kind of blend the waveforms with the blender, so that I can show you. I can manipulate these the sounds quite immediate without thinking about it too much or without repatching everything, and I'm still able to go back where I started from. So that's also something I learned over the years, especially in a live situation. It's nice to be able to kind of change the sound quite extreme, but also be able to go back where you started. So with this little setup, that's quite possible. So let's see. So with the blender, I can just blend between between these two oscillators and also their waveforms. back. I can just go back. I just have to remember what I did, but I mean, it's not too hard. But yeah, so this is my, like, let's call it main voice for all types of FM, analog FM bass sounds, and I feed this, like these two oscillators, into a wave folder to even shape it a little bit more. So we can also listen to this. So a wave folder just, yeah, does what the name implies. It really folds the waves, so you get more harmonics out of it. Let's try that with a sine maybe, or with a, is that a sine? Yeah. So it also gets louder a little bit, but here you have another stage where you can really shape the sound of the sequence. And the nice thing about it as well is that you can also go back where you started from. And yeah, I mean it's a typical, this synthesizer voice is a typical East Coast voice where you have with FM where you have like very strong waveforms that are fed into a filter where you are able to kind of filter it down. And these are, I mean, this filter is also quite nice because it's a mutable instruments ripples. It's quite nice because it also has a VCA on board. So like I said before, I'm always trying to get the system as compact as possible. And the other voice I'm using is this little tides from Mutable Instruments, where I can also like get chords out of it. And we can also listen to this one maybe, because I didn't have it on. Let's see, let's program something. So now I have basically two synthesizers in here and 4 synthesizers in this Digitone, and this allows me to be able to make transitions between tracks in a way. I'm also able to program a whole track on the octa track, for example, when I'm just doing something very reduced. So for example, I could have a little synth line going with the sampled synth going in the octa track as well as drums. So I could, you know, switch from the Digitone, make a transition to the modular, or let it both run, and then you know, like fade over to the modular or fade over to the Octatrack synth, and then change the pattern on the Digitone, or change the synthesizer pattern from the different tracks. And this is also a thing that I had to learn over the years, like how to make transitions in the live set. And I think that's still like one of the hardest parts, basically. Like it depends, you know, like when you're really jamming, and it's nice to have, as I mentioned before, these little stations. And what I forgot to tell about the modular, it's also has its own sequencer, and that's the René from Make Noise, which is a Cartesian sequencer. So that means it doesn't have, like as a normal step sequencer, just one axis. It basically has two axes, and so you have an X and a Y axis that kind of plays from bottom to the top, or you can change the pattern in this called snake mode, and that's also quite nice to play with. Let me show you that maybe. So let's go back to this little line I had here. So when I'm in the snake mode, as you can see, it runs from the bottom to the top, but I can change it up and it runs in different motions. So I'm very free to jam with the patterns that I created beforehand. So usually I would make I would make some patterns on the octa track. I would make some patterns in the digitone, and also on this machine on the René for the modular, and would kind of make very very organic patterns that can run for a while. So I'm 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 kind of having this thing running, and then I can modulate it and reprogram it on the fly, and make transitions from one thing to another. So that's basically that's basically the way this setup works. And as a little extra, I am using two delays to get some to have some more effects options, and I'm sending these. I mean, I'm using these two mono delays as a stereo delay, basically. That's quite nice, because then you can really, like, play with the left and right channel independently and get some nice stereo ping pong delays going on. And the whole thing runs into a mixer, and on the insert I have this little analog heat, which I'm not very I'm not using too harsh, so it's just giving me a little bit of glue on the master. And I'm what's also quite nice about it is that you have these two, like, EQs. It's a low and a high EQ where you can alter the sound, or like the whole sum of of your um, of your sound, to when you're playing in a club that has really harsh highs, you can turn the highs on the master a little bit. And that's also one thing, because with this simple setup, it's quite easy to mix down all the tracks already inside the machine. So when I'm arriving in a club setup, I can just plug it in, and I know that like all of the sounds, the individual sounds, are already mixed and balanced. So I just have to, at first, get everything to unity gain, and this will already be a balanced mix. And that's also something that's quite important, I think, because like a lot of club environments sound very different, especially when it comes to bass, and to frequency response for your bass drums. So this kind of, you get a nice starting point, and you just need to tweak a little bit in the sound check to get a nice powerful sound in the club. And you don't, you are not overwhelmed with having too many individual tracks going on, and like every time mixing it in a new way, which can also be nice, but I think it's good to kind of have this already balanced mix in a way that you can, yeah, work from. Yeah, and I think I'm kind of jumping from all because there's so much stuff that I can talk about, but I forgot to mention that there's also another little effects section that's happening in the modular, and that's in the bottom right corner. That's basically the morphogene, which is a crazy tape style, a tape loop style sampling device, which or granular sampling device that I'm using currently to sample bits and parts and pieces of the live set. And so what I do, I'm feeding the octatrack. I mean, right now I'm feeding actually the octatrack and the digitone into it, which also kind of carries the modular signal as well, because the modular also goes into the digitone. So what I did before was I'm able to sample the sounds and do crazy stuff with it, and even because it keeps on running after I sampled it, it gives me the time and opportunity also to change patterns, and that's what I'm also keeping in mind. Like, how do you change a pattern from one thing to another without interrupting it? So it's good to have another synthesizer that you can make your transition on, or for example have this this little sampler, live sample or live looping device that you can use to kind of, that gives you time to change the pattern. So, and what I did, I told you about this eighth button over here. So I control the record button of this morphogene with this thing here. So I can just mute stuff and then hit the sample button and kind of sample it. And yeah, let's try it again. So and what's also nice is that these buttons they have their own LEDs, so you know what's muted and what's not muted. And this only works, this eighth button is not lit because it's working as a trigger basically, so you can set it up quite nice in this little fader fox. So either it's like gate high or low, or it's a trigger. So you can see it lights up when I hit it, and it also lights up here on the record on the morphogene. So when I'm feeding into it, I'm also clocking it with the master clock that's coming through this this IntelliJ MIDI to CC thing, CV thing, and I'm able to sample stuff on the fly. So let's try that. The cool thing about it is that it keeps on running, and as you kind of shorten the gene window, which is kind of the sample window that gets looped and morphed over, you can get it really small and get some granular type of sounds, which eventually could be used to make some pads or stuff. And that's a nice way, I think, to kind of integrate it in this setup. And after that, it's just run into a filter. Right now, it's a high-pass filter. Yeah. All right. So I've talked a lot and tried to kind of cover it all. And oh yeah, I forgot one thing, because I still have this kind of crossfader left, and I also have a crossfader on here, and but this crossfader on here only works for the stuff that's running in the Octatrack. And so I got this extra crossfader, and I thought, you know what I'm gonna do with it. And the heat also has a control in, so I'm using that one to kind of to modulate the filter. So I can also, you know, high pass like the whole master, and it's also quite nice because this way you can easily build breaks, for example, and also, you know, change the pattern afterwards. And that's, yeah, that's basically it for the setup. I don't know if that was a little bit too much information, but so if you have any questions, I think now is a good point before I kind of continue, and I can also go into detail, and yeah, so just tell me what you want to know.
There are definitely a few questions from online.
Okay.
So there's a very specific question about your track life cycle. Jamie is asking if you made this step in the modular or how you made it.
This step, life cycle. I have, like, originally I made this track using a Prophet synthesizer. So what I did when I kind of, you know, I wanted, I mean, when I wanted to play this one live, because usually I play like unreleased tracks live, but because I you know, when I'm having a live set in so and so weeks, I just, you know, start making patterns and creating new kind of tracks for the live situation. But with life cycle, I try to kind of convert it to the live setup. And what I did was I got this Prophet sample and loaded it up into the Octatrack, and to kind of be able to modulate, because I really like the sound of the Prophet, and it's quite important for the track, I guess. But I wanted to be able to manipulate it in a live fashion. So I had this little digitone do the job. I think, let me see if I'm on the right pattern. That's also one thing. I usually have a little book with me where I know kind of which pattern contain what kind of sounds or sequences, so I give them names and stuff, and so I'm able to you know, go from track 2 to track 5, you know, when I really want to play track 5. So I don't necessarily have like a I don't play like the tracks from track 1 to 16. I'm free to make transitions from, you know, all over the place, and I can also swap up like different sequences. But yeah, I got I think it's this one. Let me see. So I just recreated it in the digitone, basically. So what you heard in the live set, probably, I don't know if that was the question.
Yeah, he was asking about the photon.
Yeah. So that's basically what I did. I recreated the chord sound with the digitone and layered it with the original Prophet sound to make it a little bit more crunchy. Yeah.
There was another question about how do you like keep everything in key, especially if you go into the modular. And like, is it also like in your book, or like how do you?
Yeah, that's a good question. How to keep it in key. So the good thing about this little Renee sequencer is that there is also a quantizer in there, which lets you quantize the CVs that are feeding into the oscillators. And what I do, I'm like, before I play live, I hit, for example, the A440 on the digitone, and I just program an A in here and tune the oscillators to that frequency. And I try to mostly try, like I'm mostly staying in one key, or like in relative keys. Um, Definitely, I mean, it depends on the situation, but I'm not making too much key changes because I I really like to stay in one or two keys that work together. Yeah.
Then there was another question about the modular,
Hmm.
especially in like a live set situation. Like, what do you do to make sure it doesn't get out of control?
Yeah, that's also a good question because um, I like when it goes out of control, but as I mentioned before, it's good when you are able to revert it, you know. And basically, what I do is I'm using these Blender mixers and the wave folder where I know exactly from which point I started, and I can tweak it, you know, and I can manipulate the sound and come back to it. So I just have to remember where I started. And I if I wanna, you know, modulate more stuff, I would go through DC offsets basically, and that's also what I'm doing here with this little um, DC offset generator and mixer from IntelliJ and the 1U format. So for example, this one feeds into the CV input of the through 0 FM, and I could turn it up or halfway up. You know, I just have to remember where I had it before. So it's like a one uh, preset memory, or like a one memory bank with just one option, and you kind of have to come back where you started from. And yeah, I thought about this quite a lot. I think what would also be nice are like sequential switches, for example, where you could kind of program different presets as you want, and that are just basically feeding into DC offsets. So with different settings, and then you could just, you know, go back to different stages of like these DC offsets. So I think that's the way to go to keep it kind of controllable. And also, like when you have some modulation going on with LFOs or random generators or so, I think it's always nice to have an offset before your destination so that you can, you know, easily control like how wild it gets, and then you can just uh, reverse it. Yeah.
Then there was a question about like your studio workflow, like when you actually want to finish tracks, do you record into a DAW, or like how do you go from working in your studio on the hardware to actually making like a finished track?
Yeah, that's always different, I think. Sometimes I'm just using, I mean, mostly I'm using quite limited setups, and I'm kind of focusing on like a couple of machines, and it's basically the same way I play live. Actually, I first start like making patterns, depends, like synthesizer sequences or drum sequences, and I let these run for quite a while. And you know, if I'm really getting into it, you kind of know when you're feeling it, and then I'm just hitting the record button and recording like these individual stations. So I only use an 8 track converter. So I'm always recording like stems as is. So I have like my drums and my synthesizers and my bass sounds and effects sounds, and then additionally the master. And I just, you know, kind of lay it all out on the hardware sequences and jam with it and make arrangements on the fly and manipulate the mixer and the aux sends. So I'm already getting an arrangement while recording, because for me that's the most intuitive way also, and I think that's also quite um, quite essential when you want to capture like a moment. And I think like when it comes to certain genres in electronic music, I think it's really about capturing these moments of um, yeah of power, you know.
And do you usually tend to then afterwards like pick like certain bits and just like cut it together, kind of enable it, or does it like sometimes even stay like how you recorded it in?
Yeah, it really depends on the track. I mean, I've recorded tracks in like takes basically, and just, you know, decided afterwards, oh yeah, I like take one the best. I mean, mostly it's the best, especially, I mean, at least for me. And I just, you know, kind of get the sound a little bit better, but keep it as it was, you know, because I really like to keep it, you know, to really keep this moment alive that I just captured. And I don't want to alter it at all, you know, even if that means that, you know, it's just a 5 minute 909 drum loop, you know. So it I think you can, in the end you can, or at least me, kind of feel the difference in the energy, you know, because it was really like recorded in one thing. But as I said, you know, it's not a rule. So sometimes I also do tracks completely in Ableton and have everything recorded separately if I want to add something, and I can really work it out. You know, it just really depends on my mood, and I think it's also a nice way to, you know, keep yourself fresh when you always kind of work with different environments and setups. Yeah.
Then another question about like approach to making music. Like, do you usually come into the studio with like a clear idea in your head, or is it mostly just like
Um,
turning on some machines and just seeing where it goes?
that's also always different, you know, from like one extreme to the other. So, but I mean, I I wanna try out things that I didn't try out before. So I start working on something or reading the manual, and, you know, trying out different parts of this machine or that machine. And that always, I mean, always gets you somewhere in the end. And I think that's also quite inspiring to learn new stuff. and that's for me that's very very important, to always read up on little bits of the machines or the software that you already have, because there's always um, room for new approaches and new ideas. So yeah, it really depends. Sometimes I'm I don't know, I'm seeing something crazy, or I'm feeling like this or that, and I want to express it into music. So inspiration comes from all kinds of places.
Then there's another question about the Eurorack.
Yeah,
Someone was asking what modulation sources you have in your rack.
modulation sources are there are not too many actually, and that's also because I want to keep it quite small. I mean, I could even make it a little bit smaller, maybe. But I've got this little Batumi LFO, which is quite nice because it's a quad LFO that you can sync with different types. So there's this quad sync mode, this phase mode, and the division mode, which I mostly use. So you can clock it up and then set divisions to the master clock, and get your modulation going like to to your master clock. But you know what is like my most favorite modulation source is actually my hands. So I really like to tweak stuff on the fly, and modulate it. And especially with this morphogene thing, I really like to kind of to just tweak the thing and play it. Um, Another modulation source is this little white noise and random generator uh, from IntelliGel, but I also don't use it too much as a sampling as a sample and hold random thing, um, just for different, like for a small amount. But I'm really what I really like is the slew limiter on it. I think that sounds quite nice, especially for um, for sequences, so you can get these portamento sounds. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience here at Paloma? I mean, there are a few more from online, but I also wanted to give you the chance to ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fadi, let me quickly repeat the question
Of
so the
course.
people online can.
Of course.
There was the question of like how much is pre-programmed, if like how like steps are pre-programmed, and like how much space there's for live improvisation and like changing sequences on the fly.
That's also a good question. And it always depends on the track usually, but um, the way I set up the Octatrack right now is I have individual tracks or individual samples on the different tracks. So that, for example, I have the kick on the track 1 and the hi-hat on track 2, and so I basically set it up as an 8-track, or in this way 7-track drum machine, where I always have like this configuration. So I really know that my kick is on 1 and my clap or snare type of sounds are on 5, for example. So it really gives me a lot of room to improvise. Um, but when I like prepare for my live setup, I already have these kind of basic grooves running, so that I can rely on, and that's in that way I'm able to tweak these individual sounds, like for example the length of the hi-hat or the filter of the clap or something, and I'm very able to kind of change everything on the fly, and I'm giving room for that, because that's also the fun thing about playing live, because you can really intervene and change the track that is running into a whole different direction, like when the crowd gives you that response. So you could easily do something very broken out of a 4 to the floor beat, and so I think this is a very important part. So it's not just playing pre-programmed sequences. But I mean, on the other hand, for example, Surgeon talked a lot, or talked in his workshop that he did for Schneider's Laden, a bit about this safety net, and I think it's quite nice to have this safety net in a way that you can rely on. So I know that when I'm changing to this pattern, I'm having a groove running, and I know that you know how that sequence is sounding, but I'm also able to kind of to change it completely. And as you can see here, maybe I'm always having 3 patterns with the same sound assignments, so I can program something totally different with the same sounds. And also setup wise, that might be interesting. um, I'm I mean, in the most recent live setup, because I figured 16 tracks or 16 sequences are, for me at least, enough for like a 1 hour um, live set. So I'm using the banks for different pre-programmed sequences, so that I have 4 parts per bank for just like one track, and I don't need 16 pre-programmed patterns per bank for a track. So usually I have like 5 or 6 patterns running that are like working together, maybe. So for example, have one with a hi-hat and another pattern without a hi-hat, but instead a clap or something. And I could easily jam and go back to the pattern before, and you know just have the kick and the hi-hat again. um, yeah, but it really always depends on the on the session, or on the environment. For example, what I did before the last um, live live set, I had only four. I had 4 tracks, if you want to call them, per bank, and using the 4 parts of the octatrack to kind of get the different samples in there. And in this way, I could easily also have, what is it, 4 times? No, it's actually 16 times 4 um, different tracks in the octatrack pre-programmed, but it's way too much. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, okay.
All right, I think let's go for the last couple questions. There's one from Lino on Facebook.
Mm.
he's saying hi and wanted to know what's your favorite machine or workflow after the Octatrack.
Probably I have to say the Digitone, because I'm I think you can get s- like sounds so fast and sequences so fast, and um, um, you can manipulate them quite in a very intuitive way. And I think like almost all of the electron gear is like so hands on, and I'm really relying on these machines, and I think they are yeah, they are very very fun to play with. Yeah.
Then another question, like what's your favorite piece of equipment, like of what you didn't bring tonight? Like what's in your studio?
Um, I think I'm gonna go with my laptop actually, because that's I think that's very very important. I think I could just go and make music um, outside with my headphones on and be totally creative with that. And I think that's a very powerful tool to have actually. And it's yeah, yeah, if you are looking for machines and you're just having a laptop, I think um, it's I think it's nice to kind of focus on what you already have, because the laptop is, like Ableton for me is very very powerful, especially nowadays, with the plugins sounding better and the computers getting more powerful. And yeah, I'm gonna go with my laptop
Good
actually.
answer. I think one last question regarding effects.
Hmm.
Um, like, is there something you tend to use more, like either inserting the effects or going like on sense, or and like why would you choose one over the other?
um yeah, it depends on the kind of effect. I mean, also it depends on what you want to do. I think there's no rule actually. I mean, like the basic sound engineer rule would be that there are send effects like delays and reverbs, and insert effects like EQs, filters, and compressors. But it might also be interesting to insert a delay, or insert a reverb, or and then play with the dry wet signal. Um, I I think I think it's good to play with both, and it really depends on what you're going after. So, for example, if you want to have some dry wet parallel compressing, um, it might be better to uh, to do that over an aux send, and that gives you the flexibility to having your main sound unaltered, and you can just fade in the very heavily compressed sound, and you can balance it easier on a mixing desk maybe than on a dry wet potty. But yeah, depends on your liking. Yeah.
All right, I think let me have a quick look, but I think that's it for questions from the internet. So if there's nothing from here, then yeah, thanks a lot for the great talk. Also, thanks to Steffi, and give it up for Fadi.
Thank you.